Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Jonathan Martin with Magic Leap. I'm our head of ecosystem services, and I'm joined today by our guest, Forrester's Vice President and Principal Analyst, JP Gownder.
Hey,
Welcome.
thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we can jump right into our conversation?
Sure. Thank you for having me, Jonathan. As Jonathan mentioned, I'm at Forrester. I'm an analyst on the Future of Work team, and I have spent maybe a decade looking at various dimensions of augmented reality in the enterprise, including remote assistance. I talk to lots of companies, lots of leaders at companies who are trying to figure out how to get work done better. And this remains a very interesting part of the future of work. It's a technology that we have tracked very closely for these really pragmatic kinds of situations. And so, Jonathan, I was excited to talk to you in part because I know you have a personally really interesting background here. You have done a lot of applied augmented reality work yourself in submarines, in aircraft carriers, nuclear facilities. I was wondering if you would be willing to share a little bit of the background that you have over the last 12 years or so and kind of how it got you here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really passionate about this technology. I was fortunate to get involved very early, and like you mentioned, I've had a lot of practical experience applying the technology in real work. So, getting down, I used to work every day with a hard hat and steel toes and safety glasses on, and going out and trying to find innovative ways to apply this technology. And it's been great over the past few years to watch the technology go from these initial ideas and these really big concepts into practical, usable tools that people are starting to deploy every day. So I'm very excited to talk about the technology with you today. And you have such a rich background in this area, so much time at Forrester, and so much experience in the space. I imagine you've had some very interesting conversations with very influential people in the space. And I want to hear from your perspective. What do you think the current status of augmented reality is, and where do you see us going over the next year or so?
I think at this point, organizations are doing some real projects. They are working with workers who have had problems that have been intractable in the past, things that are really hard to solve without adopting this technology in one way or another. Some of it happens on smartphones for sure. I think there's a growing recognition that hands-free is the way to go for a whole bunch of different reasons that we can get into. But there's a lot of jobs where, traditionally you were kind of pivoting back and forth between a PC and trying to do your work. There's something lost there. And I bet you've seen this in your work. And again, if you're working in, a nuclear facility is a great example because everyone can see that you want quality assurance in an environment like that. But whatever you're doing, you need that quality. And so if you're sort of toggling back and forth or even holding up a phone, there are some drawbacks to that. So what I'm finding is there's a lot of room for growth here, but there are definitely people who are engaged in this in really, really on the ground. You mentioned you wore a hard hat, you wore safety glasses, you wore steel-toed boots. A lot of those kind of jobs, and also some others. It could be. I talked recently to a bunch of utilities companies who have a lot of things going on with this area. But it could be medicine. It could be something that is not associated with the hard hat. One thing I think we should both talk about is why this is really happening now. And I'll get us started if you don't mind, because my thought is that the pandemic really did catalyze a little bit of necessity is the mother of invention with this stuff, that there were really hundreds, if not thousands of companies who started to break the barrier of thinking about using augmented reality and remote assistance of some sort or another because they had no choice. I mean, they could not travel in 2020. There were things that needed to be done. And, they said this is sort of the only path forward. And previously, some of those same organizations just seemed like they were inertial, right? They were resistant to change. And I'm just curious if you saw some of the same things.
Yeah, I absolutely did. And I'm seeing a lot of the same scenarios where people previously had either a handheld or some sort of desktop, and they're starting to realize the value of having your hands free, having the headset on your head so that you can interact directly with that digital content without having to, you know, pick something up or look away. It's directly placed in context of the environment that you're in. And that combination is making the communication a lot clearer between people. Like you mentioned, it's remote work has really become ubiquitous in office life. And this technology and augmented reality in particular is extending the reach of remote work into other environments, like you're describing. It's not just those heavy industrial environments. There's a lot of other places where you can start to see a live video feed from the field where somebody is trying to maintain something, and they could join a call like this and we could interact with them. And so you're extending that reach of remote work. We do it at Magic Leap at our own manufacturing line. So we have a huge manufacturing line in our headquarters in Florida where we make all of our optics pieces. And we have remote workers in Austin, Texas that need to interact with our manufacturing line, and they're able to do that using our technology. So it really is a great enabler in the space, and I'm seeing a lot of the same trends.
Yeah, I think to your point, there's a lot of proof points in manufacturing and utilities. There are other areas where this is becoming common. I think in my research, what I found is, to your point about it's kind of like what we're doing in offices these days, but it is extended to those places and those roles where people need to do something in person. And again, that could be, you could be a clinician, you could be doing surgery, you could be doing, just trying to get a second opinion of looking at a wound on a patient or an image for a patient. You could be doing, in some cases, maybe even like retail sales planning and trying to figure out what makes sense, or a lot of auditing, I'm finding. But I think troubleshooting remains the core of it, right? Where we have these machines or these sort of systems that someone's trying to troubleshoot. They're trying to maybe, do some kind of fix it. They're trying to operate complex machinery, and they want to get somebody else to assist them, but it's not scalable to send all of these people out at once to the same spot. What else are you seeing on your side, in addition to the things I've just mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, our customers keep surprising me in how they're using this technology in novel ways that was completely unexpected. Like you mentioned, troubleshooting is the most obvious one. It is a very powerful tool to be able to very quickly get an expert in that space with you, helping solve that problem. Being able to draw on the piece of equipment and say, no, you need to flip that switch over there on the right as opposed to the one on the left. All that really specialized knowledge, making that accessible remotely is extremely valuable. It's almost become a form of insurance for a lot of these companies to have a few devices in their facilities in case some of the lines do go down, because the cost of having a large manufacturing line go down is just, it's enormous. So some other areas I've seen, we're working with a lot of people who are using the tool for remote inspections. So I have a customer who has a large real estate portfolio, and they like to regularly inspect that portfolio, and they want to drop in and say, hey, let's walk around the building and take a look at the facility. And now they don't have to physically travel to that location anymore to investigate. I've seen some customers using it for training as well, and remote evaluation. So remote testing is another interesting, unexpected application. So particularly if you have a business that's very distributed throughout the world, the testers and the trainers aren't necessarily physically located where you need to apply that training. So being able to do that remotely and then confirm that the user has learned those skills is it's a great use of the tech.
Yeah, I think that is an interesting vector to explore for a moment, because I have also heard, again, I just did some recent interviews with some, companies. One that keeps sticking out to me is a utilities company, and they were talking a lot about how they had a known demographic crisis in their workforce that they knew about from, 2017, right? They knew that there was going to be a core group of people who had a lot of expertise who were frontline workers, really complex systems, really dangerous environments too. And they were in their 50s and 60s, and the pandemic sort of catalyzed some early retirement behaviors that kind of caused them some trouble. So on the one hand, they need to train people who are younger to do these things. But on the other hand, they also were able to, in some cases, keep some of those retiring or even retired workers, but give them a different job, essentially architect it so that they're in a contact center as an SME, a subject matter expert. They don't have to do the old work. In fact, they could even do it from home, but they can be the liaison to use the remote assistance solution with someone in the field and tell them how to do it. I thought that was really interesting because, it solves so many problems. As you say, it's like there's a training element to it, but there's also this element of demographic and retirement crisis, may be averted by changing the way that you work. It's not a small effort. You have to create this new system, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I see the same thing. There's a lot of experts in this space who've been in a variety of industries like utilities who've been working in that space for 30, 40 years, and they have all of this knowledge that's extremely valuable to these businesses. So this technology really does make those experts more accessible and more likely to interact and engage with the rest of the company and training new people, because it's easier. They can do it from the comfort of their own home. They don't have to be on the road all the time. It causes a lot more direct collaboration between those really seasoned experts and the people that are, right out of college trying to learn how to do this job and take on that role.
Yeah, I also heard a little bit about the younger people being more easily recruited into an environment like that, because it's a symbol of this is a forward-thinking company, but also they get to learn these new skills.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a lot to say in regards to image that you project when your first day on the job. You put on the latest, most cutting edge augmented reality glasses, and that's how you receive your training and your education. It says a lot about the company. And it gets new employees excited. It's also a more engaging way to learn. It's less frustrating. So you're less likely to throw in the towel and say, well, maybe this job isn't for me. So it is a much more engaging way to train employees.
Yeah. And what I've also heard is, again, depending on the industry, there can be some really great mentoring and coaching that goes on as part of those sessions, but it can literally be a safety savior. In other words, people are in dangerous environments. That's a really good use case to tap into that expertise. All of that sort of points in the direction, though, when I have conversations right now with leaders at companies, whether they are in IT or operations, business leaders, everybody's interested in ROI right now, right? It's all about business case, and it's all about solving tangible problems. So I have been tracking this for some time. I think there was an emergent case. Over the last few years, we've known what some of the possible things are, but I'd love to see what you think of what I've heard and maybe add to that picture, that when you're building a business case, first of all, you're going to do it for the particular role that you are talking about. So if you're doing field service, let's say, because that was an example we talked about before, there are some known costs that you can quantify if you're building a business case. You are essentially allowing, rather than sending, more than one person, maybe in iterative fashion, right? Usually somebody goes and does field service. They're trying to troubleshoot, fix a machine. They can't do it. They leave, they log it, someone else comes, or they're both there at the same time. All of that is possible. So you're reducing the number of truck rolls, as it's called, right? It could be a flight. You're reducing the travel burden. You're reducing, in a sense, some of the personnel time. Yes, two people are on the link for remote assistance, but one of them didn't travel and, can actually be scaled off to another collaboration soon. You should find that there will be increases in individual productivity, like how quickly they solve the problem, because they have access to not just the remote assistance, but other tools. Maybe they can just pull up some of the schematic, or they can pull up some service record or whatever. And then quality assurance and compliance is another thing that people put into the model. And finally, you mentioned this, which is really very important, is uptime. Sure. So if this whatever it is you're troubleshooting is crucial to the business operation, it breaks. The longer it takes to get there, you're not just incurring all of these service costs, like your operation isn't really working. I am curious if those things resonate, but also if there are other things that you've seen in this example or another role, that people should be aware of.
Yeah, I mean, you hit all the major ones. The most obvious one is travel expenses and the labor associated with trying to solve a problem with somebody who maybe has never seen this particular problem before, versus somebody who's seasoned and can come in and really quickly say, no, that's the resolution. But yeah, closing that gap between when the problem occurs and when you actually get resolution, so the time to resolution, it really does have a lot of impact beyond just the labor costs associated with the people that are physically there trying to solve the problem. Getting that equipment up and running, in some cases, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars every hour if a line goes down. So having something available that you can really quickly bring in to help maybe shave 20, 30 minutes off of the resolution time is massive in those scenarios. So those are some of the more tangible ways, a lot of what you already hit. I do think there are a lot of intangible things that you should also factor in that are a little bit harder to quantify, but have a significant impact on the business. Things like talent retention, things like employee engagement. If I know I have a safety net, I'm going to be more confident out in the field because I can go and I can call that expert that really can help me walk through the really challenging steps and the difficult part of my problem. And then as people are doing that, there's a lot of knowledge transfer going on. So that new employee that's trying to solve that problem is now becoming the expert, and you're training up new experts naturally through the course of that engagement.
And that's certainly, a key. So skills building is a key competency for these organizations. I would add too, I think, to your intangible point, customer experience.
Right.
You may be actually sending someone out in service of a customer, and that's helpful. To your point about the travel, I, again, recently interviewed an organization. They are a data center provider. And so they were dealing with the exact same kind of scenarios we're talking about. And what they said was, they had a travel budget for this relatively small team of maybe less than 20 people, maybe $200,000 a year. And they were able to shave $55,000 off first year and additional 20 the second. So they literally were able to drop the cost of travel by $75K in 2 years. That was a verbatim, of somebody that I talked to. And to your point, then they didn't even quantify some of these other things that we were talking about. They knew they were happening, but they didn't quantify them, but they were happy just with the travel. As you said, it's a major component. I think the productivity point is worth exploring a little bit further in terms of what we're seeing, driving that productivity. A couple of things. One of them is employee experience, which kind of encapsulates some of what we're talking about, but Forrester defines employee experience in terms of, as an employee, what is my entire perception of my employer? What is the experience day to day? And do I have things like the tools to help me get the job done? So when this goes up, we have always said there's an increase in engagement, concentration, the flow state, the psychological flow state, where people are just deeply engaged, and it leads to productivity. But I think there are other things like the augmentation of giving somebody this tool that drives productivity as well. So what are your thoughts about the productivity drivers with this kind of solution?
Yeah, sure. Again, we keep hitting some of the main points here because they're very common, and so things like making sure that your experts are actually solving problems and spending their time solving those problems as opposed to getting to the location to where the problem is. I mean, even if you have an expert that's on site at a large facility, it might take them 30 minutes or an hour to physically travel down to the location to where the problem is. Getting them in and out really quickly, it makes them more engaged in their work in a day-to-day because they're really focused and they're in flow, like you mentioned. And likewise, the people that are on the line or that are that need help in some other form. They want to do their actual job. They don't want to solve the problem that happens to be facing them at the time. So they're more engaged as well. But when we look at more on the inspection side, and in that scenario, we're finding that our customers are doing inspections more frequently because it's much easier and more accessible for them. So it's changed the number of inspections that they do. And then with onboarding, it's happening faster. They're able to get employees into the system and up and running much quicker.
Yeah, I think that last point is a really interesting one too, that training and onboarding. Again, if you're having these demographic changes in the workforce, you're going to try a whole bunch of different things. You're going to try to retain the older, more experienced subject matter experts, but you're also going to just, of necessity, have to digitize that process of onboarding as much expertise as you can, and then bring people on. And without that, the productivity will fall, right? I mean, in other words, I think you said earlier, you want to bring these people up to another level because they're simply, the entry level person is not as productive. I also think that in some of these other verticals, I'm thinking, again, medicine is a good one, where productivity is defined a little differently. It's more like, what was the success of patient care? It's more of a quality issue. Have you come across those kind of examples as well?
We have. I mean, even a surgeon likes to consult with other surgeons on a case. Right. Being able to very quickly bring a colleague into a situation and say, hey, can you take a look at this really quickly and provide me with some guidance? And what do you think? I need a second opinion. So having that collaboration, it really does increase collaboration in a lot of those environments. And that ultimately does drive higher quality outcomes for the patients as well.
And I think in medicine, but also back to manufacturing, there is this second opinion culture. And in manufacturing, there's this second person verification requirement sometimes. I talked to a life sciences company that was doing this, and they said, they'd never done remote second person verification in their process until the pandemic. And then they didn't have a choice. And luckily they were able to work that out. But that became the path for them to say, this needs to be our permanent process. Because it creates so much scale across the employees. It just keeps people from, having to be physically duplicative in where they are, that sort of thing. All of that said, as with anything, there's got to be some change management in place here, right? I mean, it is not as if these employees are all super duper familiar with augmented reality, with remote assistance. They may be familiar with elements of it, right? They might use, a consumer app on their phone that has a filter, so they've been introduced, or they played, a video game that required augmented reality. Or maybe they, even have used, person to person on the phone video conferencing, but it's not quite the same thing. And what we find in my research is that there is a level of, you got to hold some hands along the way here and help people to and expect people to be successful. Like, you need to put in place some change management, some learning and development programs to familiarize them with the basics of the technology as well as the scenarios, or giving them some confidence, that this is something that's going to add to their lives. What are you seeing in, as you deal with your customers on the change management side?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of our customers are starting to introduce this technology gradually. It's not something that they just deploy widely on day one. So what most of them are doing is starting by seeding very small deployments in their space and getting a lot of immediate feedback from their customers and from their employees. And then they're taking those learnings and they're starting to integrate them into the processes and finding where it makes sense to inject this technology. And the training is it's fairly rapid for this use case, because this is a relatively straightforward use case in the world of augmented reality. So A few key things that we look for. The solution needs to be dependable. It needs to be trustworthy. The employee needs to know when they put it on their head that it's going to work every time. It needs to be something that makes their job easier. If I've found in my career, most people are open to new technology, particularly augmented reality, if it makes their job easier and their day-to-day work is simpler when they use it. That device that they're putting on their head needs to be comfortable. It needs to be something that they almost forget about, forget that they're wearing. It's just light and usable. And so those are some things that as we're deploying, that we're seeing are important factors.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, and I slightly referenced this as well, employees of any job of any kind are open to investing a little bit of time to learn a new technology if it's going to help them. We saw this again forced during the pandemic, not just for field or frontline or mobile workers, but also just for everybody. Everybody had to say, oh, okay, I guess I don't have a choice but to learn how to use video conferencing. And I was struck, and I've interviewed dozens and dozens of leaders about this, and all different kinds of companies, that the change came pretty quick at the end of the day. Necessity again was the mother of invention, but it was new, and the pace of change. And in 2019, when I would deal with my clients, I would do inquiries on the phone, like the telephone, and often I was in the office. That is a totally different world from now. And now we're very video centric. So the pace of change has been rapid. And I think that where we are today, to revert to that comment, is folks are doing this. There are real deployments out there. People are using remote assistance in, just pretty interesting and magical ways that we have described. I think maybe the last thing we should talk about, though, is how people who haven't gotten there yet, how do they get started? And I have a million things I could say about this. I mean, I think, you want to, as you mentioned earlier, you want to do like some targeted piloting. Like, you have to go on a journey here. You have to be prepared to try it out, to get some learnings, to make sure you understand exactly how you're going to use it. You also want to make sure you're targeting the right problems, right? I mean, some workers, some roles are going to benefit from this more than others. And what you want are these moments that matter. Where introducing expertise from a remote source is really going to complement and solve the problem. I'm curious what you recommend to your customers about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's just so much potential in the world of augmented reality, and I do feel like in some cases it can be slightly overwhelming. This particular use case is one that I really think is actionable and deployable today, because it is so applicable across so many different industries and in so many different places. So I recommend that our customers start with a small number of devices, get 4 or 5 devices, and start running experiments. You need to have enough to actually have a significant sample size. If you just buy one and you try it out, the person might be grumpy that day and might not use the device. You need to actually test it and see how it's changing your employees' behaviors, and really evaluate it over the course of a few months. And I think you'll start to realize that this technology in this particular use case is going to end up being your entry point into the world of augmented reality. And it's a great starting place for anyone who's interested in the tech.
I think that's all, consistent with what I've been seeing. I want to add something which is about building a business case, because whether you are in an innovation function or you're just in an operations function or even in IT, all of those could be a starting point for this. You need to think about a business case differently from in the past. A lot of our clients have said a business case is something where I go in a room and I build a spreadsheet for 2 weeks and then I'm done. And that's just not how business cases work anymore. It's very iterative. It's a life cycle. And you start with these pilots, you hypothesize what you think the benefits may be, but then you add real world benefits that you're finding, and you understand the cost side. Now, that's just your pilot, but you're refining the model as you go along. The key thing here is it is also how should you say it, diplomatic effort, because you're going to go and walk around internally and talk to different constituencies. Again, if you started in the innovation lab, well, you need to evangelize these results, the real results, to your business partners, your operations partners, even your IT partners. If you started it in operations, you still need to get some kind of buy-in from IT and maybe senior management. So, you refine it, maybe you expand your pilot to a second stage, and then you go through diplomacy again. This is the way that we recommend that you do this, because you're at every stage, you're gaining more insight from the data, but you're also gaining more buy-in from people who are now part of this effort. If you do that, you can scale this out in a reasonable period of time. At first, it seems like, oh, it's going to take all this time. It really doesn't. I mean, all you're doing is ensuring success. So that would be my kind of recommendation for, how people can pursue this.
Absolutely. No, that's a fantastic recommendation. And JP, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like we've covered a lot of topics, and your insights into this space are very valuable. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk through some of these scenarios with us. And thank you for joining us today for our talk.
Thank you for having me. It was very fun.
Absolutely. Have a great day.